Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
Hotep, which in the language of ancient Egypt means we come with justice in peace. Welcome to Freedom Now, a Saturday Pan-Africanist and Internationalist World Affairs program. Freedom Now is committed to the principle of the rights of all peoples and nations to self-determination. We thank you deeply for your contribution to KPFK, which permits programs like Freedom Now to stay on the air. In this era of corporate acquisition and co-optation of all dissident media, we provide the microphone, challenging their corporate and racist point of view. So stay tuned for Agenda here at Freedom Now.
Fellas, I'm ready to get up and do my thing. I want to get into it, man, you know.
They just keep on saying I'm a lazy woman, don't love my children, and I'm made to be unfit. I must divorce him, cut all my ties with the horses that make me sick. It's a hard sacrifice.
Peace, hoteps, and wisdom to all of our faithful and devoted listeners out there in the radio verse. This is Brother Brandon Sankara, and I want to start things off with a thank you to all of you listeners out there who continue to support Freedom Now. You keep us on our mission and allow us to bring you our agenda for today, Saturday, March 9th, 2024. We begin with our dear sister Luianda Kaboka, bringing us the African drumbeat historical calendar for the week, reminding us that every day is a day in African history. After that, we're going to hear a special message from Brother Raymond Eugene Jenkins, correspondent at Prison Radio. His recent message and call to action for awareness about seatbelt safety in state correctional transportation is one that you need to hear. Next, Dr. Horne will be joined on the line by Moya Bailey, Associate Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University in Illinois. For our purposes today, she's author of the book, Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance. This will be some historical knowledge you won't want to miss. Then, in the second half of our program, we'll be hearing yet another relay from Prison Radio as the one and only Mumia Abu Jamal pays tribute to the 91-year-long life of Aola Ferguson. Finally, the Living Library, Dr. Gerald Horne, will be joined on the line by Warren Eugene Milteer Jr., Assistant Professor of History at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and author of the book Beyond Slavery's Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. Stay tuned to learn more about lesser known and underrepresented group in our history right here on Freedom Now. Now I'm going to be on the ones and twos as we pour this knowledge, making sure that your mental cup runneth over with revolutionary wisdom right here to quench your mental thirst on Freedom Now. KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles and kpfk.org streaming live on the web. To make sure that we stay on the smooth ride with that cultural vibe you know and love, we'll be enjoying a musical bottom featuring Gladys Knight and the Pips, Brandy Younger, Esperanza Spalding, and Mary Lou Williams. Now people get ready for this train to come and taking you one step closer to mental liberation, and stay tuned for that beat of the historical drum, followed by a special message from Raymond Jenkins with Prison Radio and an interview with Dr. Gerald Horne featuring Moya Bailey.
Alafia. This is Sister Luyanda Koboka with Freedom Now's African Drumbeat Historical Calendar. We seek to immortalize our freedom fighters and our struggles by paying homage to them, giving life to those activities that move forward the inevitable march to the world based on human and spiritual values rather than profit, racism, and sexism. March 8th, 1820. Harriet Tubman, with a Bible and a gun, organizes hundreds of enslaved Africans through the Underground Railroad to freedom from chattel slavery. March 8th, 1928. Laura Kofi was the most successful Universal Negro Improvement Association organizer next to Marcus Mosiah Garvey. These two, with thousands of cadre globally, built the UNIA and African Communities League. The UNIA and ACL, with over 5 million disciplined members, was the largest global organization of Africans at home and in the diaspora. Their objective was the building of a unified Africa free from colonial and neo-colonial rule and the repatriation of all Africans in the diaspora to build Africa. March 9th, 1898. Paul Robeson, singer, actor, athlete, scholar, and world-renowned revolutionary, was born. Paul Robeson was a leading spokesperson in the anti-capitalist, pro-socialist movement of the working class in general, and Africans in particular throughout Africa and the diaspora. March 10th, 1977. Lumumbist forces begin armed class war against the neo-colonial fascist regime of Mobutu, financed by the US CIA and a host of right-wing European Christian fundamentalists. March 12, 1947. The United States proclaims itself the protector of the world from the working class ideologies of socialism with the Truman Doctrine. Though without the socialist bloc, the Nazis would have been undefeated. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics sacrificed 30 million Russians in major battles to defeat Nazi Germany. March 12, 1927. Minerva Mirabal, the oldest of 3 Mirabal sisters, Dominican women, who defied the Trujillo dictatorship and the United States invasion and occupation of their country. All 3 sisters were executed on November 25, 1960, due to their militant anti-U.S. colonial activism. March 12, 1791. Benjamin Banneker, one of the greatest African architects of his period, is commissioned to lay out the complete city and capital of the United States, the District of Columbia. March 13, 1979. The revolutionary forces of the New Jewel movement in Grenada, led by Maurice Bishop, overthrow the Uncle Tom government of Eric Gary, thereby bringing the people of Grenada free medical care, education, subsidized foods, housing, and pride in their government of Grenada, serving the people of Grenada and not the multinational food and spice corporations. March 14th, late 17th century. Tituba, African Native American healer from Barbados, persecuted as a witch due to her practice of traditional African culture, was the slave of a Salem Christian minister. Tituba shunned the Puritan lifestyle and religion and openly practiced her African medical cultural rituals and was much sought after as a healer. The 1692 hysterical witch hunts against women targeted her for hanging. We hope that this overview of the struggle of the oppressed against all forms of exploitation will place your activism within a long and glorious tradition of struggle and will incite those sitting on the sidelines to take up ideological and organizational weapons to smash the present regime of Bush and all his lackeys in the Democratic and Republican parties of the world. We will close out with our chant of unity from the struggles in Azania, South Africa. Amandla, you respond Awethu, which means the power to rule, the power of the land, the power of humankind is ours, the people. Amandla Awethu. Amandla Awethu. Amandla Awethu.
Hi, this is Mr. Jenkins from Corcoran State Prison, and my topic is going to be today is that prisoners are human too, and the reason why I'm saying that is because of the seatbelt. The seatbelt law. We back a while, a couple of years, maybe 3 years ago, there was a bus that turned over because no seatbelt was on the school bus. Now, on prison buses and state buses, they have no seatbelt for the prisoners that when they transfer. I think that it should be a law. I think it should be something that needs to be looked into, because do we have to wait a long time before something happens? Accidents that happen before we stand up and say, why was no seatbelts on the bus like they did to school? Accident happened, and it shouldn't have never happened. Kids should have never got hurt. So are we waiting on the same thing happen for a state bus that's transferring prisoners, or county bus that transfer prisoners to court, for an accident to happen before we stand up and say seatbelts should be made to be on state buses that transfer prisoners in the county jail buses? What is my thing is, what is we waiting on? Why do we take so long? What is it that we have to wait till something happens before we act on it? I think it's bizarre that things like this happen. And the California seatbelt law, vehicle code 273-515 BC, all transportation should motor vehicles should have seatbelts, and they don't. So my thing is, why that we, and why we ain't pushing it, and why it's been ignored. We are human too. Yes, we are in here being punished, what they call it, but we still are human, and we still have a right to be safe also. As a community, it's being safe. We feel that when we get out, we have a right to show the community that we are changed. We are different people that we was when we came in. And it's like that society saying, on certain society saying no. So if this is what we're saying about the seatbelts. If you agree that seatbelts should be worn on state buses that transferring prisoners county jail, then please give me a feedback.
These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
From Pacifica Radio, KPFK Los Angeles, Freedom Now, this is Gerald Horne. And with me on the line is Professor Moya Bailey, Associate Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and author of the book, Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Professor Bailey.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And it's a pleasure to have you. So why did you write this book?
So the short answer is that is something that is required of my field. I'm a book field, so that's the short answer. The longer answer is I really wanted to explore the way that Black women were resisting some of the ways that they were being depicted in popular media, particularly on social media platforms. And writing this book was an opportunity to look at that resistance very closely. And misogynoir is a term that I coined that describes the particular anti-Black racist misogyny that Black women experience. And so this book was an opportunity for me to really highlight the resistance that Black women were able to create for themselves in the very same platforms that were often used as vehicles to denigrate them in the first place.
So what is an example of the kind of defamation that you're referring to? And what is an example of the more adroit resistance to that very same defamation?
Sure. So one of the examples that I explore in the book is looking at how Black trans women specifically have been targeted by misogynoir in terms of how they're depicted in popular culture and media. And for example, you might see representations of Black trans women that show them as ugly, as men trying to be women, etc. So all of these representations are designed to make Black trans women seem sort of ridiculous and not real. And one of the ways that trans women have tried to combat this representation is through creating their own media platforms and campaigns. So Janet Mock created the hashtag Girls Like Us, which was really a way to signal to other trans women that there is space for them in our digital platforms. So Janet Mock's hashtag Girls Like Us was mobilized to create opportunities for Black trans women on Twitter to find each other. And ultimately, other trans women started to use the hashtag as well to talk about just generic things, what's going on in their lives, the mundane. And because it was on a public platform like Twitter, it allowed for other people to gaze in, to look in on the conversation that was happening and the conversation that was being marked by this particular hashtag. And so that really created an opportunity for people to counter some of the negative ways that they were being represented, also by not actively having to direct a direct response to some of these negative representations. People were just using the hashtag to talk about what was going on in their day-to-day lives. And that sort of transformational digital alchemy is something that I talk about in the book, this idea that people are creating what they want to see and not necessarily always reacting to some of the negative images and negative representations that exist.
So who is Megan the Stallion, and how does her experience illustrate the theme of your book?
So Megan the Stallion is a pretty famous Black rapper who is in the last couple of years has gotten a lot of attention for her rhyming capability. But you might have heard about a trial that she was involved in when she was allegedly, although now I believe the court has said she was, which she said, shot by a fellow rapper named Tory Lanez. And what happened after this was she did not want to go to the police, but because there was a shooting and there was evidence that she had been shot, she was asked to testify in a trial of Tory Lanez for this shooting. And she was denigrated in the process. So even though she was the one who was shot, the public backlash against her and outcry against her for even testifying was really severe. And there was lots of talk of Megan as somehow denigrating the Black community, doing something against Black men, for actually speaking up about what happened to her. And again, I want to mention that she did this under a bit of duress and even tried to avoid talking to the police initially because I think she, like many of us in our community, is very concerned with the way that Black men are unjustly and often connected to our carceral system. And I don't think she wanted that for Tory Lanez, but she was pulled into the trial and had to testify. And what's interesting is that there was a way that people started to think of it as a trial against Meghan, as opposed to looking at it as a trial of Tory Lanez for his shooting of Meghan.
Now, there are likely those in our audience who are familiar with that case since it unfolded in Los Angeles itself. And speaking of popular culture, what is Swarm and how does it illustrate the theme of your book?
So Swarm is a new series that I believe was on Prime. And Swarm is a show that features Dominique Fishback, an actor portraying a character who has an unhealthy obsession with a figure who, in this, generated world, is akin to our Beyonce. And in the series, Dominique's character is seen killing people who don't love Beyonce as much as she does. And what's interesting to me in terms of how Misogynoir operates in this particular series is that, Dominique is trying to, manage a deep-seated sense of abandonment through her love of Beyonce. And while that is an okay depiction for anyone, what ends up happening in the series is that Dominique is portrayed as somebody who doesn't really have any social, any social or moral compass because of this overriding love for this star. And the portrayal of Black women in that is the loss of her humanity and the loss of other people's humanity for not loving Beyonce, this Beyonce figure in this world. So the way that Misogynoir comes through is in this portrayal of this woman as completely devoid of anything but adoration for this Beyonce character.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there platforms that are better or worse with regard to defaming Black women? For example, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, Reddit, or are there platforms that best illustrate resistance to defamation of Black women?
Yeah, I think Twitter started out as a platform that offered a lot of space for people to create a representation that countered some of the negative representations that were happening on the same platform. So as I mentioned, the hashtag Girls Like Us was something created by community to counter some of those negative representations. But as Twitter has shifted with Elon Musk's purchase of the platform, it's harder for people to use it in the generative ways that they used it before. I've seen a lot of activists and organizers moving to other platforms because of how Twitter has changed in just the last couple of months. One thing I will say is that Facebook has been proven to use algorithms that promote a certain level of visibility to content that reinforces certain stereotypes that people already hold. So, for example, if you're somebody who is already a fan of Donald Trump, the algorithm of Facebook is going to move in such a way that you're going to see ads and content that affirm your beliefs and don't necessarily disprove them. So I think Facebook is a platform that's much more difficult to generate the kind of resistance that could shift someone's perspective on the way Black women are represented in pop culture generally.
Mm-hmm. Now, who is Lena Waithe, and how does her work illustrate themes of your book?
Lena Waithe is an actor, producer, director, writer who has created a lot of different popular media. She is a Black lesbian and got a lot of positive attention for a wonderful episode of the show, Master of None, talking about a coming out story of a Black lesbian that she portrayed on the show. And Angela Bassett played her mother in that particular episode. And I think it's really one of the most beautiful examples of undoing misogynoir in terms of how Black queer people are generally represented in popular culture. But in terms of my book, I talk about how Lena Waithe got her start. And something people might not know is that she wrote a web series of videos around the time that different creators were using YouTube to do videos about the things that certain people say. So she was part of a series called Things Black Girls Say. Also, that word is not things. But as the writer of this particular series, she really harnessed a lot of stereotypes about Black women in that particular series. And it went viral, ending up with something like 1 million or more views. And a lot of those, to me, represent some of the caricatures that we have seen of Black women throughout time. So in the book, I talk about this particular strategy of using some of these traditional caricatures of Black women to mobilize them towards a career, because there's some ease in which if you denigrate Black women, you can actually move up in the entertainment industry. And so I see her work now as somehow countering or trying to counter some of those early representations that she was responsible for bringing to the small screen or to YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Finally, Professor Bailey, author of the book Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance. You're at Northwestern University in Illinois. Would you recommend to those who would like to be the next Professor Bailey to come there for graduate study?
Yes, I absolutely would. I think that Northwestern has a wonderful cadre of faculty who are ready to greet students in a number of areas that would prepare them for a really wonderful career within academia, whether that's through the program I'm connected to, the Department of Communication, or other departments within the School of Communication. I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for graduate students within this field and at Northwestern specifically.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, Professor Bailey. Thank you for joining us on KPFK Pacifica Freedom Now, Los Angeles.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back here to Freedom Now. We're going to send you off to Prison Radio for a quick message and tribute from Baba Mumia Abu Jamal. After that, it's time for more historical contextual breakdowns with Dr. Gerald Horne, who's being joined on the line by Professor Warren Eugene Milteer Jr. Let's get right to it.
Aola Ferguson, 91 years of life, love, and struggle. The long-term activist and educator, Aola Ferguson, wife of the former political prisoner, Herman Ferguson, has finally reached her rest. Born Constance Josephine Swan on June 28, 1932, in Brooklyn, her father, Chieftain Swan, and mother, Mary Coach, gave her a brother, Charles, and her sisters, Julia, Myra, and Gloria. When she graduated summa cum laude with an education degree from Hunter College in 1965, she began a long and distinguished career as a teacher at PS 40. She found a partner in Herman Ferguson, as both opposed the racism they found in the public school system in New York. In 1967, Herman Ferguson got arrested, and she helped begin a defense committee for him and other members of the Black Brotherhood Improvement Association. In 1972, Herman went into exile in Guyana in South America, where she would join him. On June 29, 1972, the two were married, and she would take the name Aola. Aola Ferguson would continue her passion of education by becoming executive editor of the Guyana National Service Publishing Office, where she edited, wrote, and published educational materials for Guyanese students and teachers. When the couple returned to America, Aola would fight again for Herman's freedom. Herman would work with the late Safia Bukhari and Jalil Montekin to found the Jericho Movement, a group fighting for the freedom of Black political prisoners. Aola and Herman would begin the annual Political Prisoners Tribute Dinner to bring together families of such prisoners to demonstrate that they were not alone and isolated. Aola and Herman retired July 2000 to go home in North Carolina. Aola is survived by 10 grandchildren and 13 great-grandchildren. After 91 winters, she returns to her ancestors. With love, not fear. This is Mumia Abu Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
Eu sem você não tenho porquê, porque sem você não sei nem chorar. Sou chama sem luz, jardim sem luar.
For Pacifica Radio, KPFK Los Angeles, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Warren Eugene Milteer Jr., Assistant Professor of History at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and author of the book Beyond Slavery's Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Professor Milteer.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
And we appreciate your joining us. So why did you write this book?
So I wrote this book to give both academics and the larger public a better understanding of the topic of free people of color in the South. This is a topic that I've been researching for many years and also have a personal connection to. So I really care about people knowing more about this topic. Some people know who free people of color are, but a lot of people have never heard of them. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn about their experiences and the larger society through their story.
Now, in your book, as I understand it, you suggest that pre-U.S. Civil War, there were about 4 million enslaved Africans in the United States and about 250,000, or actually, no, 500,000, excuse me, free people of color. Is that accurate?
Yes, there are about 500,000 free people of color in the whole United States. They're almost evenly split between North and South, but there's slightly more than the South than there were in the North.
So what is the personal connection that you mentioned?
I have ancestors who were free people of color, primarily in Virginia and North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there distinctions between and amongst the treatment of, quote, free Negroes, unquote, quote, mulattoes, unquote, quote, musties, quote, unquote, quote, free people of color, quote, unquote? And would you mind defining and distinguishing those phrases and terms?
Right. So as far as free people of color is concerned, the term operated as kind of a catch-all phrase for a variety of people with as far as ancestries are concerned. These are mostly people of African and or Native American descent. I've also found a few examples that I talk about in my book about people who had connections to South Asia and India and that area of the world. And as far as the other terms are concerned, free Negro in particular could sometimes be used as a synonym for free person of color, and how it was applied varied quite a bit. Sometimes it had that same broad use that I discussed with free people of color. In other cases, it is being used, at least from what you can tell in some context, as specifically people who are at least considered in their society, I guess, more African, but that's not exclusively the case. And the other terms, mulatto, at least on paper, is supposed to refer to somebody of mixed European and African ancestry, but it also could be applied to people of mixed African and Native American ancestry, or it could just be used as a color term, referring to people who were perceived as lighter in complexion. So there's a lot of these terms in their actual application lack specificity. And then the term mustee generally is a term that's used for people who are of African and Native American heritage. And again, there's a lot of rough area around how it was actually used in day-to-day life. And as far as treatment based on these categories, I think that the answer is complex. In certain contexts, being perceived as having more European ancestry or Native ancestry could make a difference. But also, I think that some free people of color had serious and important ties to people who were not necessarily of African descent, and that those ties could be reflected through these terms. So maybe to give you an example, with the term mustee, mustee again is a term that's often used for people of African and Native American descent. And there are people who are labeled as mustees who are part of tribal communities, say in New England. And so being a member of a tribal community has a value in itself and connects people to a certain experience, a certain history that would be important and would be recognized within that New England community.
Was there any sort of hierarchy in terms of mistreatment? I mean, were so-called mulattoes treated better than, for example, free Negroes or musties, for example?
I mean, I think that it's hard to make a generalization about that. I think it's the context, in certain contexts with certain individuals, yet they saw these people in a kind of a hierarchy with people who are closer to being white in their perception, maybe having more value than others. But how that operated in day-to-day life could be more, it's difficult to generalize, because you could have people who say are considered quote unquote mulattoes, who are the descendants of maybe poor white women, and that's how they obtain their freedom. And being the descendants of poor white women, they don't necessarily have access to wealth and power just because they are of mixed ancestry. Whereas you could have somebody in another case who is maybe an emancipated person whose father was a wealthy white person and passed on some of that wealth to that individual, and that individual could be perceived as being more important, or actually, has certain power that other free people of color, regardless of their background, don't have. So in the minds of some people, there's a hierarchy. In another context, it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. And what was the impact of the Nat Turner slave revolt of 1831 in Virginia on this community?
So I kind of argue that the Nat Turner Rebellion had a variety of different impacts on free people. The closer you get to the actual rebellion, which took place in Southampton County, Virginia in 1831, I think the effects on individual free people of color are more real. There were free people of color who were charged with being participants in the rebellion in Southampton County and some of the neighboring areas. But as you get further away from the rebellion, what you see is that in some cases, lawmakers at the state level are taking advantage of the rebellion as a way to push through their pet projects. So some states prohibit free people of color from preaching. They try to impose curfews or control the movements of free people of color. The colonization movement, which is a movement to send free people of color to Africa and other parts of the world to get rid of them, basically. Those people who endorse that movement try to take advantage of the situation and get laws passed supporting colonization. So what I see is there are these ideas that have been floating around in the society for years before the Nat Turner Rebellion takes place. But the Nat Turner Rebellion gives the advocates of those issues an opportunity to push for them and potentially get some support. So, for instance, in the state of Virginia, where the rebellion took place, the Colonization Society was able to get a little bit more financial support from the state than they had previously. And they were able to use the rebellion as a way to motivate lawmakers to do something.
Now, in 1831, in the run-up to the Nat Turner Revolt, were the alleged participants musties or mulattoes or free Negroes, or was there any distinction made between and amongst those categories?
So it's kind of difficult to tell for sure. I think that some of the people who were charged, and we're talking specifically about free people of color, were probably categorized as people of some mixed ancestry of some sort. But, how do they actually look? How were they viewed because of that in their community? It's really hard to tell from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm. What about the role of gender in this community?
I definitely argue that gender is really important in the lives of free people of color and how they're able to operate in the societies that they live for a variety of different reasons. Some of that is just plain legal, as far as there are legal differences that certain free people of color deal with because of gender. So for instance, There's a system of apprenticeship that exists, particularly in colonial America, where the children, illegitimate children of white women by men of color, whatever their background may be, are placed into servitude. And part of servitude agreements require that servants not have children or marry while they are under servitude. And if they do, they can get extended terms of service. And so early on, there are service agreements that require people to be in servitude until age 31. And in a society in which there's no birth control, that often is very difficult for people to navigate as far as not having children in that time period. And so you see generation after generation of women being forced into servitude because of this. Their sons will be able potentially to lift themselves out, but the women are not. It also pops up in other areas. In particular, we're thinking about voting rights. So there are a few southern states up to the 1830s that allowed free men of color to vote. I'm thinking specifically of North Carolina and Tennessee. And so that's an area, of course, where free men have that right, but free women do not have access to the vote. So we see it there. Of course, we see it when it comes to inheritance of property. There are issues around divorce and free people of color and how they're able to navigate divorce based on whether or not they're men or women. Men do seem to have some level of privilege in that system at the state level. So those are just a few examples of things that I've seen and talked about.
Mm-hmm. Were there any differences between British colonial rule in North America vis-a-vis free people of color, that is to say pre-1776, and the U.S. era post-1776?
Yes, definitely. I think that in general, we could say that the opportunities for free people of color under the law in the British colonies, especially if we're thinking about more well-to-do free people of color, there was more opportunity there, I think, in general, than what you will see in the early national United States. And part of that is that the politics in the early national United States change. Of course, slavery is a major issue in the United States and its development, and the way that slavery plays a role in politics affects free people of color. And in most southern states, the situation for free people of color, at least as far as the law is concerned, decreases or declines over time. And so that's definitely a major difference. I think the possible threats in the U.S. period are different and more extreme. The rhetoric is more extreme than what you see in colonial America. Now, I should say also at the same time that in the colonial period, a large portion of free people of color were not well-to-do, and many of them were in servitude for long periods of time, and that colored their experiences as well. And so even with the legal flexibility of the British period, there were a lot of challenges for free people of color in that time.
Mm-hmm. Were any of these free people of color enslavers beyond purchasing members of their family?
Yes, there were some free people of color who were enslavers. From what I was able to find, a lot of those free people of color tended to be situated in the Deep South, so places like Louisiana and South Carolina, but there are others in North Carolina, for instance. There's some examples there of free people of color who are holding other people in bondage for profit. I've found examples of runaway ads posted by free people of color for individuals who've escaped from them. So yeah, there are definitely people who are in the business of getting rich through slavery, or trying to at least make a basic profit through keeping other people in bondage. That's a reality of the system. And I think part of that is that's how people got wealthy in the South. If you wanted to get wealthy in the South, that was the thing to do. And there were some people who didn't have a problem doing that.
Beyond being enslavers, were any of the free people of color slave traders?
Slave traders. I guess not in the like formal big business sense. I haven't come across any of these people. But as far as like people just selling people on the side or moving one or two people, yeah, I mean, there are people who are definitely involved in the slave trade in that sense. Yeah, there are definitely people who are involved in that sense. And I've seen other cases, maybe not the slave trade, but people who are involved in capturing runaways. Those type of people definitely exist.
Who was Benjamin Banneker?
So Benjamin Banneker was a free person of color, free man of color from Maryland, who lived primarily in the 18th century, and he was both a scientist and also a vocal opponent of discrimination in his time period. He published an almanac, which made him particularly famous. And also in his writings and work, he challenged some of the founding fathers, in particular Thomas Jefferson, for what I think he saw as hypocrisy around the issues of freedom and owning other people while claiming to support a wider version of freedom for humanity. So he was vocal about that, wrote things about that, and was a very important voice, especially in the early national period of the United States.
Finally, Professor Milteer, author of the book Beyond Slavery's Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. What's next on your research agenda? What do your readers have to look forward to?
So right now I'm doing some research on free people of color, but I'm looking more broadly than just the South now. I'm looking at the connections between the South and the North, trying to figure out some of the similarities, the differences in the way that freedom evolved in those two regions. And so I've been going around to different archives, looking at records, primarily in the North now, since I've done so much work in the South. So hopefully I'll be able to get that together soon and have another book.
Sounds good, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Warren Eugene Milteer Jr., Assistant Professor of History at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., author of the book Beyond Slavery's Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you so much for having me.
They just keep on saying I'm a lazy woman, don't love my children, and I'm made to be unfit. I must divorce him, cut all my ties, because his words they make me sick.
In closing, we'd like to thank our guest, Moya Bailey from Northwestern University in Illinois. Find a Black-owned bookstore near you and get her book, Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance. Next up, we want to thank Warren Eugene Milteer Jr., Assistant Professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. While in that bookstore of yours, also grab his book, Beyond Slavery's Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. Shout out to Dr. Gerald Horne for doing what he does best and guiding this train of mental liberation towards Pan-African enlightenment for yet another Saturday. Hit up your favorite bookstore right now and find one of Dr. Horne's many informative texts to enrich your library and your mind. Word to producer Sister Tej. Much love to our dear sister Luyanda Kaboka, and thank you for giving us the African Drumbeat historical calendar for the week. Much love to our spiritual backbone Baba Didan Kamathi. Many thanks to Prison Radio, Mumia Abu Jamal, and Raymond Eugene Jenkins for keeping us in the know. Abundant thanks to our marvelous engineer, and last but certainly not least, thank you to all of you loyal listeners and supporters out there. It takes a village to build a revolution, and Freedom Now is a village to be reckoned with. This has been Brother Brandon Sankara, and you can join us on Facebook at Freedom Now Gerald Horne. You can email the program at freedomnow@kpfk.org or go to our audio archives at kpfk.org. Scroll down to find Freedom Now, and you'll be able to hear this program as well as 60 days worth of prior programming here at KPFK 90.7 FM. We now send you off to our sister Assumpta with Spotlight Africa, coming up next, addressing issues facing Mama Africa. And until next Saturday, here at Freedom Now, we stand running our marathon, ready for revolution.